Welcome to Femme Fantasy, where transformation, elegance, and self-discovery come to life. It started with a whisper, not from someone else, but from inside my own mind, a soft, steady murmur that seemed to speak when everything else was silent. I used to think it was just nerves or fatigue, but lately I've come to believe it was a part of me I'd ignored for too long. The whisper would come at night, when my room was washed in the pale blue of my computer screen, when the hum of the ceiling fan filled the quiet. It told me strange things, not commands, but invitations. It said things like, "What if you try to see yourself differently?" Or, "You don't have to hide from softness." I would close my laptop and stare at my reflection in the black screen, my own face hovering above the faint ghost of my desktop icons. There was something unfamiliar about it, not because it had changed, but because I had never really looked. My hair too short, my eyes uncertain, my posture guarded, like I was constantly bracing for something. But then, sometimes, if the light hit just right, I would catch a glimpse of something gentler, a version of me that didn't flinch at her own reflection. The first night I gave in to the whisper, it wasn't dramatic. I just wanted to feel calm, to stop fighting whatever this was. I put on my headphones and found a video, one of those guided relaxation audios that promise to help you find your true self. I didn't think much of it, but as I lay there, the voice in the recording, slow, measured, almost melodic, started to peel back something inside me. It didn't tell me what to be. It told me to breathe, to imagine the weight of expectations lifting, like layers of heavy clothing slipping to the floor, to picture myself as light, unbound, open. Somewhere between one breath and the next, I saw a memory, me as a child, standing in my mother's room, touching the smooth fabric of her scarf. I remembered the way it felt, the shimmer of it against my fingertips, how I'd wanted to wrap it around myself, not because it was hers or feminine, but because it was beautiful. And then, almost immediately, I remembered the shame that followed. The sound of footsteps in the hall, the panic of being caught, the desperate need to hide. The hypnosis voice said, "There's no shame in softness." And I started to cry. Not loud or messy, just quiet tears that felt like they'd been waiting for years to fall. I didn't know why that sentence hit so hard. Maybe because it was something I needed to hear all my life. When I opened my eyes, the room seemed different. Not brighter, exactly, but clearer, like the air had thinned and everything was sharper, more honest. I touched my face and felt warmth there, like my skin had been waiting to breathe. For the first time, I didn't look away from my reflection. That night, I dreamed I was standing in front of a mirror, and my reflection smiled before I did. The next morning, everything looked the same, but I didn't feel the same. It was subtle, like the world had exhaled and taken me with it. The streets outside my window, the quiet clatter of dishes in the kitchen, the smell of coffee, all of it felt strangely intimate, as though I was seeing it for the first time. I remember brushing my teeth and catching my reflection again. I paused, toothpaste foaming at my mouth, and thought, "Who are you becoming?" The whisper in my head was quiet that day, but not gone. It was patient, lingering beneath each ordinary action. I went about my routine, work, errands, conversation. But beneath it all, I felt that hum of curiosity, that gentle pressure asking me to explore further. That evening, I found myself opening my closet without really knowing why. My clothes hung like shadows, dark, practical, safe. None of them made me feel anything. I ran my fingers along the fabrics and realized how much of my life had been built on hiding inside what I thought others expected of me. I hesitated, then reached for an old box I kept on the shelf above. Inside were a few things I hadn't touched in years, remnants of experiments I'd quickly buried. A light scarf, a small bottle of nail polish, a cheap wig I'd once bought as a joke but never really wore. My hands trembled as I lifted each item, not from fear, but from recognition. Each piece felt like a word in a language I used to know but had forgotten how to speak. I don't know what made me do it, but I turned on that same voice recording again. The soft tones filled my room, and the instructions seemed to speak directly to the moment. Allow yourself to explore what makes you feel true. Every sound, every color, every texture can guide you. My breath slowed. I draped the scarf around my shoulders, hesitantly at first. The fabric was cool against my skin, and it carried the faint scent of lavender from when I'd last washed it. I caught sight of myself in the mirror again, still me, but not quite the same. There was a fragility in my reflection, yes, but also a quiet strength I didn't recognize before. I painted one nail, then another. The color was soft, barely visible in the low light, but it was enough. With each careful stroke, I felt the walls inside me shift a little. I wasn't pretending or playing a role. I was listening to the whisper that had finally found its voice. Later that night, lying in bed, I stared at the faint glow of the polish on my fingers. I traced my thumb over it again and again, as if to prove it was real. I should have felt silly, embarrassed even, but I didn't. What I felt instead was peace, and beneath it, something deeper, longing. That's when I realized the hypnosis wasn't changing me. It was revealing me, and that terrified me more than anything else. The following week became a quiet blur of contradictions. Outwardly, I lived as I always had, work, errands, polite smiles, but inside, something was shifting. I could feel it in small, fleeting moments. The way sunlight caught the edge of my hand and reminded me of that soft polish still faintly clinging to my nails. The way a stranger's perfume on the bus would make my heart twist, not with envy exactly, but with recognition. It wasn't that I wanted to become someone else. It was that I wanted permission to be the person I already was. The hypnosis tracks had become my nightly ritual. I didn't think of them as hypnosis anymore, more like guided conversations with the parts of myself I had silenced. The voice always began the same way. Close your eyes. Breathe. Let go of who you think you need to be. And each time, those words loosened something that had been bound too tightly. One night, I tried something different. Instead of lying in bed, I sat before my mirror. The soft glow of the desk lamp made the room feel suspended in amber light. My reflection looked uncertain at first, my eyes darting, my posture tense. But as the recording continued, I let my gaze soften. The voice said, "See yourself without judgment." I tried. I really tried. I studied my face, the slope of my nose, the tired circles beneath my eyes, the tentative curve of my lips. And for a fleeting second, I saw her. The person I might have been if I hadn't spent years running from her. The moment didn't last, but it left an imprint. The next day, I couldn't stop thinking about it. On my lunch break, I walked past a shop window filled with soft pastel scarves. I told myself I was just browsing, but my hands reached out before I could think. I found one the exact color of dawn, a pink so pale it almost looked white until the light caught it. I bought it without even trying it on. That evening, I wore it. Not out, just at home. I wrapped it around my neck, let it fall lightly against my chest, and something in me settled. There was no performance in it. No fantasy. Just comfort. Like stepping into the right temperature of water after being cold for too long. Still, the fear lingered. I kept glancing toward the window, half expecting someone to look in, to see me. My reflection in the glass wavered between two selves, the one the world knew, and the one just beginning to breathe. That night, I dreamed again. This time, I was walking down a long corridor lined with mirrors. In each one, a different version of me waited, some frightened, some smiling, some barely visible through the fog. And at the end of the hall, one reflection turned to me and whispered, "It's safe now." I woke up trembling, not from fear, but from the unbearable tenderness of being seen. The days began to blend together, but not in the dull, colorless way they used to. Each moment seemed to carry a quiet pulse beneath it, a hum of anticipation, as though my life were waiting for me to catch up to it. I would go through the motions, smile when expected, talk when spoken to, but behind it all, a secret rhythm beat in time with something new inside me. I started noticing how much of my life had been built around small denials. The way I'd lower my voice in conversation, the way I'd avoid touching certain fabrics in stores, the way I'd edit myself mid-sentence because something sounded too soft. Each of these moments was a small act of self-erasure. Once I saw them, I couldn't unsee them. So I began to undo them, gently, almost imperceptibly. I let my voice find its natural cadence, slower, lighter, more expressive than before. I bought hand cream and used it without shame. I stopped pretending not to care about how I looked. These weren't grand gestures, they were small acts of truth. Every night, I'd return to the same ritual: headphones, low light, reflection. The recording I listened to had become familiar, but somehow it always felt new. "You are safe," the voice would say. "Each breath brings you closer to who you truly are." One evening, I paused the audio halfway through. The room was utterly still, save for the faint tick of the wall clock. I looked at myself and tried to speak out loud, just a simple sentence. It came out shaky at first. I said, "I want to be her." My own voice startled me, breaking the silence in a way that felt both terrifying and sacred. The mirror didn't answer, of course. It just reflected the tremor in my jaw, the nervous rise of my chest, the glimmer of wetness in my eyes. But something changed in that silence. For the first time, I wasn't imagining a different person on the other side of the glass. I was recognizing myself. The scarf, the nail polish, the tone of my voice, these weren't disguises. They were fragments of honesty returning to where they belonged. I wasn't becoming something new. I was remembering something I'd buried. Later that week, I went out wearing that same pale scarf tucked beneath my jacket. No one noticed, but I did. The fabric brushed against my skin every time I moved, a soft, secret reminder that I was still here, still real. On the train home, I caught my reflection in the window. For a fleeting moment, I didn't flinch. I even smiled. That night, when I closed my eyes, I heard the whisper again, not from the recording this time, but from within me. It said, "You're almost there." And for the first time, I believed it. The next phase of my transformation came quietly, the way dawn slips into the world before you realize night has ended. There was no single event that marked the shift, only a series of moments so subtle that I almost missed them. The way I started lingering in front of my mirror longer than I used to. The way I began choosing colors instead of clothes, fabrics instead of function. Each choice, no matter how small, was a way of reclaiming something I didn't yet have words for. I had started keeping a journal, not because I planned to, but because the feelings were becoming too large to carry silently. The pages filled up with tangled thoughts, fear of discovery, the relief of release, the question that returned again and again. Who am I, really, when I stopped pretending? Writing became another mirror. Some nights, I could barely read my own handwriting through the blur of tears, but I wrote anyway, because silence felt heavier than truth. One Saturday, I decided to clear out my wardrobe. It felt like an exorcism of sorts. I pulled out every shirt, every pair of pants that no longer felt like me, and piled them on the bed. The air in the room grew thick with the scent of dust and old fabric. I hesitated before each decision, not because I missed the clothes, but because I feared what letting them go symbolized. When I was done, only a few hangers remained. The closet looked emptier, but I didn't. I sat down in the quiet that followed and caught sight of my reflection in the full-length mirror. I'd seen that mirror 1,000 times before, but this time, it felt like a witness. I touched the glass, fingertips meeting their reflection, and whispered, "I'm not hiding anymore." It was a promise, fragile but real. That evening, I walked outside with my scarf wrapped openly around my neck. The cool air brushed against my skin like approval. No one stared. No one said a word. The world, I realized, was far too busy to care about my quiet revolution. That small truth gave me courage. As weeks passed, I began experimenting more, a softer hairstyle, a lighter tone of voice, movements that felt less forced. It wasn't about imitation. It was about remembering how it felt to be unguarded. Every gesture was a kind of unlearning. I noticed that when I let myself move naturally, my body seemed to sigh in relief. Still, there were moments of fear. One night, a friend called unexpectedly, and I almost didn't answer. I looked around my room, the scarf draped on the chair, the nail polish bottle on the desk, and felt exposed, even though no one could see me. But I did answer, and when I heard their familiar voice, something inside me steadied. I could exist in both spaces, not as halves but as a whole still forming. When I went to bed that night, I left the mirror uncovered. The moonlight fell across the glass, and for the first time, I didn't look away. My reflection looked calm, almost serene. I fell asleep watching it, as though I were keeping her company. And somewhere between waking and dreaming, I heard that voice again, softer than before, almost a breath. "Now that you've seen her," it said, "can you let her live?" That question echoed through me for days. Can you let her live? It wasn't just a whisper anymore, it was a challenge. Every time I caught my reflection, every time I dressed, spoke, or moved, I could feel that quiet insistence tugging at the edges of my thoughts. It was no longer enough to imagine who I might be. I had to start living as her, even if only in small, careful steps. It began with my mornings. I started waking up earlier, before the city had fully stretched awake. The early light had a softness to it, the kind that didn't demand anything from you. I'd sit by the window, brush my hair slowly, and breathe in the quiet. It became a ritual, one that made me feel anchored. Sometimes I'd speak to my reflection, tentative at first, then with more certainty. Simple phrases like "good morning" or "you're okay," but they mattered. They made me feel real. One morning, I tried makeup for the first time. Not much, just a bit of concealer and lip balm, something that felt natural, almost invisible. My hands shook, but when I looked up, the difference was startling. It wasn't the color or the texture. It was the intention. For once, I wasn't trying to fix something. I was expressing it. The person looking back at me seemed softer, truer. Later that week, I found a name in my journal. I hadn't meant to write it. It just appeared between the lines, as if my hand had moved before I could think. I wrote it again, slower this time, letting each letter settle into the page. It felt like remembering a melody I'd forgotten I loved. I didn't say it out loud right away, but I kept returning to it, tracing it with my finger as though it might dissolve if I didn't. The hypnosis recordings changed too. I didn't follow the same ones anymore. I found new voices, calmer, clearer, focused on confidence, self-acceptance, presence. The first time I listened, I noticed how much less resistance there was. I wasn't fighting the voice anymore. I was listening as an equal, not as someone being guided, but as someone finally walking beside her own truth. There were setbacks, of course. A comment at work that made me retreat inward, an old friend's teasing remark that left me raw for days. But each time, I came back stronger. The world didn't bend easily, but I did, and not in the way I used to. It wasn't submission, it was resilience. That night, after one of those difficult days, I stood before the mirror again. My scarf lay folded neatly on the dresser beside me. I reached for it, hesitated, then draped it around my shoulders. The fabric rested against my collarbone like an old friend. I whispered the name I'd written in my journal. Just once. The sound of it filled the room, fragile but alive. It felt right not because it was perfect, but because it was mine. The reflection smiled, not as if she'd heard me, but as if she'd been waiting for me to say it. The first time I introduced myself with that name, my voice trembled so badly I almost didn't recognize it as my own. It happened by accident, a quiet, almost invisible moment that could have gone unnoticed if not for the way it made the air change around me. I was at a cafe, ordering a drink to go. The barista smiled, asked for a name, and before I could think, that name, her name, slipped out. For a heartbeat, everything froze. The espresso machine hissed, the air smelled faintly of cinnamon, and I waited for the world to correct me, to laugh or question. But none of that happened. The barista just nodded, wrote it down, and called it out a few minutes later, like it had always belonged to me. I stood there holding the cup, the letters of my name scrawled in marker, and it felt like holding proof of something sacred. I walked home slowly that day, fingers wrapped tight around the warmth of that cup. Every step felt deliberate, like I was tracing the outline of a life I hadn't dared to live until now. When I reached my apartment, I placed the cup on my dresser beside the mirror, next to the scarf and the nail polish bottle, the small reliquary of my quiet evolution. That night, when I listened to the hypnosis track, I didn't close my eyes. I watched my reflection instead. The voice spoke of confidence, of seeing oneself whole. "You are not waiting to become," it said. "You already are." Those words washed over me like light. I could feel my breath deepen, my body unclench. The mirror didn't show perfection, it showed truth. The tension in my jaw, the vulnerability in my eyes, all of it was real. In the days that followed, I began using that name privately, in my thoughts, in my journal, in whispered affirmations before bed. Each time I said it, it felt less like pretending and more like remembering. I didn't need anyone's approval. The name didn't need to be given to me. It had been waiting. I started dressing differently, not to hide or perform, but to align the outside with what I felt inside. Flowing fabrics, lighter colors, gentle shapes that echoed how I moved. The changes were small, but they added up. Even strangers began reacting differently, not necessarily recognizing, but sensing something softer, more centered. Still, there were moments of doubt. Some nights I'd stare into the mirror, half afraid the reflection would vanish, that she'd dissolve back into the person I used to be. Those were the hardest nights. I'd remind myself to breathe, to stay present, to trust that what I was building wasn't fragile fantasy, but something enduring. One evening, as I brushed my hair, I noticed how naturally my hands moved, how unthinking the gesture had become. It wasn't imitation anymore. It was instinct. That realization made me smile, a small, honest smile that reached all the way to my eyes. I turned off the light, leaving only the glow from the street lamp outside. In the dimness, the mirror caught just enough reflection to reveal my outline. I stood there for a long moment, tracing the faint shimmer of who I had become. Then, from somewhere deep inside, not a voice, not a whisper, but a knowing, came the quiet certainty that I was no longer pretending at all. There came a point when the mirror stopped feeling like a test. For so long, it had been the boundary between who I was and who I was trying to find. But one morning, I realized I no longer looked at it searching for something. I looked because I wanted to say hello. It felt strange, almost tender, to see my own face and feel warmth instead of shame. The change had crept in so gradually that it startled me when I finally noticed it. I began to move through the world differently. Not cautiously, as before, but with a kind of quiet assurance that I hadn't known I was capable of. I started to notice beauty in places I had overlooked, the play of light on shop windows, the rhythm of footsteps in the rain, the way people's voices softened when they spoke to someone they cared about. It was as if the act of accepting myself had widened my perception of everything else. Still, there were days when I stumbled. Days when I woke up and the old fear returned, whispering that it was all an illusion, that I was too strange, too late, too much. On those mornings, I'd put on the scarf. It had become my talisman, a small, silent promise wrapped around my throat. Whenever I felt doubt closing in, the fabric reminded me of every step I had taken, of every quiet victory that had brought me this far. One afternoon, while cleaning, I found the box that had once held all my secret things, the scarf, the polish, the wig. Now it was nearly empty. I sat on the floor with it, running my hands along the edges. It struck me that this box used to represent everything I hid, and now it represented everything I had freed. I didn't throw it away. I kept it as a reminder of the journey, not the shame. That evening, I wrote in my journal again. My handwriting had changed, looser, more flowing. I wrote about how strange it felt to live honestly, how the smallest actions now carried meaning. I wrote about the moment I'd said my name out loud for the first time, and how it still echoed in me like music. Then I wrote something I hadn't dared to before. I am her. I stared at the words until they blurred, until I could feel them rather than just read them. As night fell, I played one of the older hypnosis tracks, not because I needed it anymore, but because I wanted to honor how far it had taken me. The voice still felt familiar, comforting, like an old friend visiting from another life. "You're whole," it said. "You are free to exist as you are." I closed my eyes, breathing slowly. For the first time, I didn't feel the old tug of resistance or the ache of longing. I felt something quieter, steadier, peace. And just as I was drifting toward sleep, I heard that whisper again, faint but certain, somewhere between dream and waking. "You've arrived," it said. But when I opened my eyes, I sensed there was still something unfinished, a door not yet opened, a truth not yet spoken. The feeling of something unfinished followed me for days. It wasn't discomfort. Not exactly, more like a pulse beneath the surface, steady and patient, reminding me that transformation isn't a single moment, but an unfolding. I'd spent so much time learning to see myself that I'd forgotten there might be more to living as her than just reflection and ritual. One morning, as I stood at my window watching the city stir awake, I realized what it was. I had been quietly becoming someone new, but the world didn't know her yet. My reflection knew. My journal knew. But outside those walls, I was still invisible. The thought filled me with equal parts excitement and fear. That weekend, I decided to step outside as her, not halfway, not in secret, but fully. The morning of, I stood before the mirror longer than I ever had before. My heart was thudding, not from doubt this time, but from anticipation. I moved slowly, carefully choosing what to wear, a soft sweater that felt like safety, jeans that fit just right, my favorite scarf, the pale one that had been with me from the beginning. When I finally looked up, I expected to see nerves in my reflection, but instead I saw calm determination. I whispered my name once, testing the sound of it. It filled the room like sunlight breaking through clouds. Stepping outside was surreal. The air felt sharper, more alive against my skin. Every sound, the rustle of trees, the distant hum of traffic, felt magnified. I could feel my heartbeat in my fingertips, but I didn't turn back. I walked slowly down the street, head high, not as someone pretending, but as someone arriving. People passed by, some glancing briefly, most not at all. The fear I'd built up in my mind, the fear of being seen, being judged, began to dissolve with each step. No one stopped me. No one stared. The world didn't shatter. The earth kept spinning, and I was still standing on it, more solid than I'd ever felt before. At a small park nearby, I sat on a bench beneath a tree. The leaves above me shimmered in the wind, scattering bits of sunlight across my hands. I took a deep breath and felt it, not pride exactly, but gratitude. Gratitude for the quiet moments that had carried me here, for the voice that had guided me, for the courage that had come in whispers instead of shouts. I stayed there for a long time, watching the world move. It was strange how normal everything looked, and yet how completely transformed it felt. I wasn't imagining anymore. I was simply being. When I finally walked home, the mirror by the door caught me by surprise. I stopped, studying my reflection in the faint evening light. For the first time, there was no separation between the image and the feeling inside me. There she was, not waiting, not hiding, not pretending. Just there. And for a long, quiet moment, I couldn't tell if she was smiling first or if I was. But even then, even in that calm, I sensed the final step was still waiting, not a change of appearance, but something deeper, something to do with the way I saw the world and how it saw me. The final step didn't arrive with fanfare. It wasn't a dramatic revelation or a sudden epiphany. It came as a quiet understanding, the kind that slips in when you've been listening long enough and the world finally answers back. I realized one evening, standing in my bedroom with the last traces of sunlight washing over the walls, that all the pieces, the scarf, the nail polish, the soft cadence of my voice, the name I had claimed, were not tools to craft a self. They were breadcrumbs leading me home. I sat on the edge of my bed and traced my fingers along the journal, now thick with months of thought, fear, and discovery. Each page felt like a map, each word a bridge from who I had been to who I was becoming. I opened to a random page and read, "I am her." And for the first time, I didn't add qualifiers, excuses, or hidden fears. The sentence stood alone, simple and absolute. I felt a weight lift, a quiet exhale from the deepest corners of me. Looking into the mirror, I smiled without hesitation. It wasn't a small, tentative smile of someone testing the waters. It was full, deep, the kind that reaches your eyes and settles in your chest. The reflection mirrored me perfectly, yet differently, not because it had changed, but because I had. The mirror had ceased to be a divider. It was a companion, a witness to everything I had endured and discovered. I remembered all the nights of hesitation, the tears, the trembling hands. I remembered every whispered word, every moment of fear, every tiny victory that had seemed insignificant at the time. And suddenly, they all felt like threads weaving into a tapestry I had the privilege to inhabit. I realized that transformation wasn't a final destination. It was a continuous unfolding, a willingness to be seen and known fully, even when the world doesn't recognize you yet. I stepped away from the mirror and moved through my apartment with a new awareness. Each object, the scarf on the chair, the polish on the desk, the familiar glow of the lamp, held quiet meaning. They weren't props. They were reminders that this life, this self, was real and deserving of space in the world. Later, I opened the window and let the cool night air brush across my face. The city hummed softly beneath me, and I felt a profound sense of alignment. I didn't need validation. I didn't need applause. I didn't even need certainty about tomorrow. What mattered was this moment, this life, this self, fully present, fully alive, fully mine. I whispered my name again, not to anyone, not as a test, but because it was true. The sound of it filled the room, a quiet declaration, a pulse in the stillness. And for the first time, I didn't feel any part of me shrinking away. I was whole. I was here. I was her. And as I closed my eyes that night, I felt the journey settle around me like a gentle tide. The fear, the doubt, the wonder, the delight, all of it becoming part of a story I could finally own. A story that would continue, not as a struggle, but as a life lived fully in the truth I had fought so long to embrace. For the first time in my life, I knew that being seen, truly, unreservedly, was not the end of the journey. It was the beginning of everything. The mirror reflected me one last time before the darkness claimed the room, and I smiled, knowing she would always be there, steady, waiting, whole. The journey was complete, and yet it had only just begun.